Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're diving into one of the most fascinating and honestly contradictory times in American history, the Gilded Age. Now, this was an era of mind-blowing invention and wealth on a scale nobody had ever seen. The country was basically blasting off into the modern world. But the name itself, gilded, is a huge clue. It means something is covered in a thin, shiny layer of gold. And what's underneath? Well, that's where the real story is.
So that gets us to the big question for this whole period, right? We all love progress, new tech, new ideas, but what if all that progress has a dark side? What's the real cost of moving that fast? Come on, let's peel back that golden layer and see what we find.
So, to really get a handle on this era, you have to see that it had two completely different faces. First up, let's check out that glittering golden surface that gave the age its famous name.
And this slide, right here. This is basically the whole story in a nutshell. On one side, you've got this incredible explosion of new ideas and technology, creating these huge fortunes and totally transforming the country. But on the other side, that same engine of progress was running on pure exploitation, and the whole system was just swimming in corruption. It was truly a tale of two Americas living right next to each other.
And we're not talking about small improvements here. These were the building blocks of the entire 20th century. Railroads didn't just cross the country, they stitched it together into one giant market for the very first time. You had oil and electricity powering factories that could run around the clock, while new ways of making steel meant cities could suddenly grow up, giving us our first skyscrapers. It was progress on a scale that was just unimaginable, and corporate mergers let companies get just as big. Now, one of the key legal tools that made all that growth possible was something called a trust. On paper, it just sounds like a boring financial agreement. But in the Gilded Age, it became this super powerful weapon for taking over entire industries, wiping out all the competition, and creating these massive monopolies that controlled everything from oil, think John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil, to sugar. This is how a handful of people got so incredibly powerful and rich. Okay, so that was the shiny golden surface. Now, let's look at what was really bubbling up just underneath, starting with the unbelievably tough life of the average industrial worker. Just let that sink in for a second. 12 hours. That wasn't a long day. For millions of men, women, and even kids working in the factories and mills that were powering this whole new economy, that was the day. And it wasn't just the hours, not by a long shot. We're talking 6 days a week, for wages so low your entire family had to work just to survive. If you got sick, you didn't get paid, simple as that. If you got seriously hurt on the job, which happened all the time with this new dangerous machinery, there was no compensation. Nothing. The work was boring, soul-crushing, and flat-out dangerous. It's in these conditions that the labor movement was forged. So what do you do? How can one single worker possibly fight back against a gigantic corporation? You can't. The only answer was to team up, to use what's called collective bargaining. Instead of just one person timidly asking for a raise, you have thousands of workers, all represented by a union, demanding better conditions. It's all about strength in numbers. And the absolute powerhouse of the early labor movement was the American Federation of Labor, or the AFL. It was led by this really smart guy, Samuel Gompers, and they focused on skilled workers, carpenters, plumbers, people who were really hard to replace. That was their strategy, and it gave them a ton of leverage in negotiations. And it worked. The AFL eventually grew so big, it represented a third of all union workers in the whole country. But as you can imagine, just asking nicely didn't always get the job done. When the talks failed, unions had one big weapon they could use, the strike. And when they used it, things often got really explosive, and sometimes really violent. Just read this line from a flyer for a labor rally in Chicago. Arm yourselves and appear in full force. Whoa, this is not the language of a friendly negotiation. You can just feel the tension, and it was about to boil over at one of the most famous events in labor history. And it did. At that rally, in Chicago's Haymarket Square, someone threw a bomb. All hell broke loose. Police and protesters were killed. The impact was immediate and devastating for the unions. Suddenly, in the public's imagination, the labor movement got tied up with anarchists, foreign radicals, and violence. It was a massive blow, and they got branded as un-American, which set their cause back for years. So what was the result? Well, after decades of struggle, strikes, and trying to organize. By the turn of the century, get this, only 4% of American workers belonged to a union. Just 4%. Despite the awful conditions, organized labor was facing a monumental uphill battle. Now, the big industrial bosses who were fighting the unions, they weren't operating alone. Oh no. They often had very powerful friends in politics. Which brings us to the other huge problem simmering under the Gilded Age's surface: political corruption on an absolutely industrial scale. The engine driving all this corruption was the political machine. Now, not a real machine, but these super well-organized political groups that basically ran entire cities. They were especially good at winning over new immigrant communities. They'd help you find a job, get you a place to live. All they asked for in return was your vote come election day. So what was the whole point of these machines? It wasn't public service, I'll tell you that. It was about getting rich. And their favorite tool was something called graft. It's a simple idea, really. Just using your political power to line your own pockets through bribes, kickbacks, and just straight-up fraud. And if you want to see the perfect symbol of Gilded Age graft, look no further than this building, the New York County Courthouse. It's better known as the Tweed Courthouse, and it was the pet project of the most notorious political boss of all time, William Boss Tweed, the guy who ran New York's Tammany Hall machine. The sheer nerve of this scam is just stunning. The courthouse was supposed to cost about $250,000. What was the final bill? $13 million. So where'd all that money go? You guessed it, straight into the pockets of Boss Tweed and his pals. They faked invoices, charged millions for work that was never done, and pulled off the biggest swindle of the era. So, with the unions getting crushed and the politicians robbing everyone blind, it's easy to think things were just hopeless. But, slowly but surely, people started to get fed up. They began to fight back and demand some real change. This cartoon just nails the challenge that reformers were up against. See, corruption wasn't just one bad politician. It was the entire system. You had local crooks in the word ring, you had schemes at the state level, and then you had huge national scandals like the whiskey ring, where officials were bribed to ignore taxes. The whole thing felt rotten, from the very bottom all the way to the top. So how do you even begin to fix a system that broken? You start by changing the rules of the game. The Pendleton Act was a massive first step. It went right for the heart of the political machine, the patronage system, where government jobs were handed out as rewards for being loyal. By making people take merit-based exams for those jobs, it started to professionalize the government and starve the machines of their power. And that kind of brings us full circle, doesn't it? When you think about the biggest fights of the Gilded Age, the struggle for workers' rights, the demand for honesty in politics, those fierce debates about wealth and inequality, they don't really sound like ancient history, do they? They sound an awful lot like the debates we're still having today, which really makes you wonder, is the Gilded Age truly over? Or are we still living in its long, complicated shadow?